This week we begin the Parsha of Vayikra, not only the Parsha of Vayikra, Sefer of Vayikra. Most people assume there's a certain disconnect between the Parsha of Vayikra and practical living, but in fact, upon a closer look, there's actually several connections between our living and the Parsha. I just want to draw our attention to one of them. It says in there's a widely observed custom that when making hamotzi on bread, especially on the Shabbos table, to have salt accompanying the bread. And the Ramah in the Shulchan Aruch, the Code of Jewish Law, quotes a pasuk in this week's parsha, which supports this idea. Now, the context for the verse in this week's parsha is referring to sacrifices, and it says, "Al karka bancha takrav melach." On all the sacrifices, you shall have salt next to the sacrifices. So the Ramah says, the Ramah was one of the major halachic authorities, Ashkenazic halachic authorities back in the 16th century. He was living in Krakow, Poland. And he said that and he's also quoting the Talmud, that a person's table is equivalent to the altar, and we shouldn't just view our table as just a table just to gobble down food, gobble, but rather it's an elevated opportunity to use the food as sustenance for the person to be engaged in the service of God. So just like one would apply salt to the sacrifices back on the altar, we should put salt on our bread before eating the bread. I wanted to just expound on this a little further, because I think this teaches us a very powerful lesson. And that is that if one thinks about the properties of salt, one of the hallmarks of the properties of salt is that the properties of salt have the powers of extraction. In fact, that's why when it comes to kosherizing an animal after it's slaughtered, we put kosher salt on the animal. In fact, there's a product out there today called kosher salt. Why is it called kosher salt? Because it comes from that this salt was actually coarse salt. That we would put this on the animal, and this salt would actually extract the blood from the animal, because we, as observant Jews, are not supposed to consume any blood, as the Torah states. One is not supposed to consume any blood. So how was one properly remove the blood from the animal? The answer is with salt, because salt has the power of extraction. So why am I mentioning this over here? And the answer is because salt represents the power of extraction. And there's a deep symbolism over here, and that is that we have, in the very depths of our soul, we have, as the Talmud says, a certain spark that really is bursting with desire for a connection with God. The spark, this like ember that's bursting with this desire for the connection with God, is, as the Talmud states, "Ritzonenu lasos ritzonecha." It is our will to do your will. As our will, meaning the will of humanity, to do the will of God. So the Talmud asks the obvious question: if it's our will to do the will of the Almighty, umama akev, so then what gets in the way? And the answer is So'or Shebe'isa B'Shibin Malchios, which basically means excessive materialism and the burden of the oppressive regimes in the world. And we would interpret that in a very elementary way as lots of different stuff and distractions. There's so many stuff and distractions that get in the way. But peeling away all the stuff and distraction, all the excessive materialism, all the oppressive regimes, all this stuff, all the distractions, there is one burning ember, one spark within the recesses of every Jewish soul that is bursting with this desire of Ritzonenu lasos ritzonecha. It is our will to do your will, the will of the Jewish people to do the will of the Almighty. And the question is, how do we get there? It has to be extracted. And that is symbolized with salt, because salt has the power to extract something from the very depths to the surface. And that is why every single time when we sit down to a meal, we sprinkle the challah, we sprinkle the bread with a little bit of salt. And the reason why we do that is because we want to demonstrate that we want to extract that yearning desire for a relationship with the Almighty. We want to extract that to the surface. I wish you a very good Erev Shabbos.